Welcome back. We're going to be working on another quick table runner. I'm doing two this week because I really fell in love with two different sets of quilting designs. And as I got interested in the designs, I started looking through my fabric, and I found old fabric from my stash that inspired me further. So I couldn't make up my mind between the two, so I'm doing both. This table runner is basically going to be 3 squares that are on point, similar to the last one I did. Only in this case, I'm going to piece those 3 squares so there'll be 3 4 patches on point. The reason I'm doing that is 2 reasons. One is the seam lines are going to make placement guide for the designs that are going to be input into the 4 patch. The other thing was I couldn't find something that I really liked for the background for this. I didn't want a white or beige background with this stark black. None of the other lighter colors like yellow or the blue really went with the theme of what I was trying to do. So as I was pilfering through my stash, I found 4 different pastel flesh tones, and I think they're going to work fine. They're going to be light enough for the designs to show up, but not so light that they create a huge stark contrast with this. I'm hoping it will pull in some of the lighter tones. So having said that, I've got all my pieces cut. For the 4 patches, I have 4 different colors. There'll be 1 of each color in each 4 patch. I've got enough to make 4 squares, but I only need 3. I'm going to use the other one as my backup. So these squares were cut 7 1/4 inch square, and so they're going to finish probably 13 3/4, 14 inch square. I'm not so worried about the exact size because we don't have to match it up to anything. So I'm going to put my glasses on, and I'm just going to start sewing these together in sets. And these 2 pinks look similar, but they are different. So I'm going to, well, they're all going to touch anyway. So I'm going to sew these together in sets of 2. And then I'll sew after I iron them with the seams, then I will sew those sets of 2 into units of 4 for my 4 patch. This is going to be a very quick process, especially since I already have all the cutting done. I'm just going to do this in an organized fashion and always keep the same color on the bottom and the same one on the top. When I iron these, I'm going to pay attention to which way the seam goes because I want the seams to nest. But also because these 2 pinks are so similar, I want to make it so that the pink is diagonal from each other, so they won't really be touching. I think I've already seen that I cut one of my pieces wrong, so I may have to downsize the block to 13 1/2. I'd rather do that than go back upstairs and cut more, mostly because I'm running behind. I usually try and stay ahead of the video process. We generally try to put out a new video every week, every Saturday morning. Those videos are available on YouTube or Facebook. And so some weeks I try and get 2 or 3 ahead so that I could stay a month ahead, but sometimes a holiday or something, a special event, sneaks up on me like Valentine's Day did this year. I didn't get started thinking about Valentine's Day until really it was a week away. And then on top of that, I got inspired enough to do 2 projects for that one holiday. So I'm rushing a little bit. I'm going to clip these apart. And in case you didn't know it, this is called chain piecing, when you assembly line pieces one after another. It's a little bit faster, and also there's less thread waste in between the two. So as I said, these were meant to be cuts 7 1/4. So I'm going to go ahead and press these, and we'll get right back here to join these together into a 4-patch. I eliminated the ones that I miscut, so I've got exactly enough pieces to do the squares that I need. Let's see if I can get these to nest with the mistake that I made. Not looking like it because of the way I ironed them. I'll put a little pin in there. I've heard that perfection is the thief of joy, and I'm certainly no perfectionist. These will all be different about which colors go in there. If I were doing a large quilt and I didn't correct mistakes as I go, those mistakes are amplified out. But in the case of this small table runner, this is basically the end of the seams. We have our setting triangles that will go on the edges, and then this is finished. So the little variance that I have in this block is not going to prevent me from finishing. I do get mad at myself for making mistakes. I'm going to go back and iron these open. So you can see we basically have a very simple 4-patch. These are going to be sewn on point with these setting triangles both at the top and bottom and at the 2 ends. So I'll show you what that looks like on the next step. I'm keeping my design options very fluid because of the amount of mistakes I'm making. I have the 4-patch. I have 3 4-patches. This one is a unique one because of the colors. I have two that include the peach, so I'm going to use those on the two outside edges. This one's going to be my center. I've already sewn on two of the setting triangles. On this one, the 45 degree was here on this side. On this side, it was opposite diagonally. And that creates my center block unit. The next thing to do, because of the way this is going to sew together, this will be my next unit. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this on to here, but then I also have to put my two smaller triangles on this side. Now these will finish approximately 14 inches. So I cut these squares 15 inches, which was added 7/8 with a little bit, and then I cut them on the diagonal. That's for the setting triangles. For the end triangles, these I only had to cut 11 inches square, and I cut those on the diagonal. So if you put two of these together, that's an 11-inch square. So I will need two of these on these two edges, and I will fold these in half and sew them on, and then I will have this one. And then you can see when this joins together, we're starting to get our table runner. So I have the center unit. I need to make two of these complete units, one for each end. And once I have that, then I can go ahead and put the three units together and we'll have our table runner. I may or may not put a border on this one like I did the previous one. I might even use the same fabric that I used. I can go ahead and do this one because it's opposite. I can't do this one until I iron this seam open. I already have my center mark on the piecing unit, so all I have to do is fold my triangle in half and give myself a little crease. And then I can place that crease over my seam line there and put a little pin in place. And then after I do this seam, I'm going to run and do those two I'm going to iron those two seams done. Everything always goes wrong when you're trying to hurry though. You know that. I was sewing these together upstairs in my studio, and the feed dogs on my machine quit working. So that machine's going to have to go in for service. It has happened once before. I think it's just a spring. One of my regrets is not learning how to repair a machine myself, but I have to be honest, that really isn't something I want to do. It is a time user to have to take it to be repaired, and I have to pay for it, but I did not get into sewing to repair machines. I will want to sew this, iron it, and I'll be right back. At this point you can see the table runner coming together. I have to iron this seam back, and then I just have to piece these three units together. I've got another one here in my lap that will go down here, and I'll really be careful to make sure I pin this location here, and then I can flip that out and sew the next one. These, because of the way they're sewn, those seams nest together really nicely. So I can put a pin in that. I'll just repeat this process once for each end and iron all of these seams so that the unit is laying flat. And then I'll decide on the border, if I want the border on there or not. Excuse me. The reason I would sew the border is because on the setting triangles, the outside edge is bias, and I would sew that little border piece on there just as a stabilizer to prevent further stretch on that bias side. Sometimes you have a choice about how you cut something so you don't end up with bias on the outside edge. But I broke that rule because I knew I was going to go ahead and put the little border strip on it. One more at the other end and I'm done. When I was a kid in grade school during the Valentine's week, the kids would write those little paper valentines, and I always had such a fun time with that. One of the other things we would do is buy these conversation hearts, and they were just little chalky candy, but of course it was sweet, and so what kid doesn't like that? And I always have a fond memory of these little messages on there. Be mine, love. Some of them were funny and not so nice, but conversation hearts are basically the theme for this table runner that I made this week. The fabric that I used for the main print was based on conversation hearts. I believe this was a high fashion fabric, and you saw me construct this earlier. Kind of a down and dirty quick project. I believe I cut the squares 7 1/4. They finished just under 14 inches. The setting triangles on the sides were 15-inch squares cut in diagonal, and the ones on the two ends were only 11 inches. On these, the bias is here. On these, the bias is here. Because the bias is running on the outside perimeter on these side, I went ahead and put an inner border just to stabilize the stretch on that, so when I get it on the machine it doesn't stretch out. So that was the table runner. The designs plural that I'm going to be using today are all called conversation hearts, and I'm going to be plopping in motifs into these 4-patch. There's 4 different designs, and I'm going to move which part of the square each one goes in so that they float a little bit in there. And then I'm going to be using a pantograph on the 2 edges of, in this setting triangle. One of the things that I wanted to mention was I am doing this as a digital design, but that's not the only way to do it. Urban Elements also sells these tearaway quilting designs. Now these were made for use on a domestic machine or on a long arm machine. They're a great tool for getting an overall design, but also they're great practice for getting muscle memory for creating designs on your own. So whether you were using this on the domestic machine or the long arm, they're a great way to practice and expand your skill with specific designs. Now, you've seen me in the past use the fusible batting, and that's what I would do if I were using a domestic machine with the tearaway design. You attach the tearaway with 505 to the top after it's already fused to the batting and the backing, and then you can quilt right through here and then tear it away when you're finished. So it is a single-use product. But today I'm going to be doing this digitally. So I'm going to go ahead and get this loaded. I already have my backing loaded and the batting. I'm going to go ahead and pop the table runner onto the frame, and I'll show you the designs up close and how we're going to inset these specifically into the squares of the 4-patch. We have the main menu of the IntelliQuilter. We have our 4-patch on each of the 3 on-point squares. That's what I'm going to be starting with. So I'm going to choose a design for each of the 4 squares. So I will need my eyes. Design sew, start new. We're going to use a block pattern, and we're going to mark on quilt. So I'm going to go ahead and trace the seam line of the uppermost square in the 4-patch. If it helps, you can move your needle down a little bit so you can get a really accurate reading. But this motif is meant to float in the square, so it shouldn't be all the way out to the perimeter anyway. But I'm still going to try and be as accurate as possible. So I could be using my clicker here if I could find it in my mess. And I'll hit close square, so you can see we have our square on point, which is one of the 4 patches. I'll hit finished. I'm going to go into download designs because I haven't cleaned up my library yet. And let's see. These are the blocks that I'm going to be using. We have conversation hearts. They're roughly 6 inches, which is approximately, well, the blocks are a little bit bigger than that. So I think I'm going to start with love because I have a really bright red isocord thread in the top. The back of the fabric is just one of these pastel colors. It's a very light one. And I've used a variegated thread isocord in the bobbin just because I wanted to see what it looked like. That's mainly the reason. So I have my motif selected. I'm going to hit continue, and you can see how the design is floating a little bit from the edge, which is fine, but I don't like the way that it's situated, so I'm going to go ahead and hit rotation. And you can float this any way you wanted. You can see I can spin it and spin it and spin it. What I'm going to do is spin it so that it's almost perfectly level with the writing, and now I'm going to move it. Now my point is going right into the tip of the block, and it's going to start and stop in the middle. It's not going to connect to the edge. I don't have a problem with that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit finished. Now I also could scale this up or down if I wanted to, but I'm pretty happy with the way that is. And so I'm going to hit finished and sew quilt. Select our pattern, continue, sew quilt, and it should go to the start position of the first piece. It is just took a single stitch to pull up my thread. And I'm going to put my machine on manual as it's asking me to do. I'm going to hold these threads out of the way while I hit start. Each one of these is going to be less than a minute, probably even less than half a minute. Just like that, I've sewn one conversation heart here. I'm going to go ahead and repeat the love on the two outside blocks in a different location rather than the top. And then I'm going to go ahead and change my thread colors. I wanted to change the thread colors for each of the 4 different types of hearts so that they look kind of like the pastel colors that the original candy conversation hearts came in back in the day. I have my last location for the love design. I've already traced out the block and programmed it, so I'm going to go ahead and hit start. You can see that it takes less than 1 minute to do each heart. After this one, I'm going to change my thread color, and I'm going to move on to one of the other 3 remaining patterns in this conversation hearts set. We have this 4-patch square up close, so I'm going to do the whole thing again. Design sew quilt, start new, block pattern, mark on quilt. I'm going to outline this square using the needle and the tablet to mark locations. I can make as many of these little points as I want, and you can take as much time as you want to do this. I'm going pretty fast. So now that we have our representation of the square we're going to sew finished, I'm going to go to the conversation hearts, and the one that I am doing in the purple is cute. So you can see it came in upside down. I'm going to hit rotation and just spin that around. Then I'm going to hit move and move it down. I like to have that little start point right in the corner on this particular design, and I'm going to hit scale and decrease it just a little bit. I'm going to go back to move and move that to the center, and now I can hit finished. It's ready to sew out cute. I can hit finished, sew quilt, select my pattern, continue, sew quilt, and it's going to move to my start position, pull up the thread, move out of the way, hit continue and start. And this will go ahead and sew out cute. And just like that, it's another one finished. I'm going to go ahead, I've done 2 cute already. I have 1 more block. And you can see just how fast this is going. I have done all of the cute. I've done all of the love. So I need to do hugs and be mine. Hugs I'm going to do in gold thread, so I've changed that out. I've already given the parameters of my square, and you can see each time it's going to come in different. This one is coming in sideways, so I'm going to hit rotation and try and get that nice point right down at the middle. Next I'm going to hit scale. I'm going to decrease this just a little bit, and then I'm going to hit move. And I'm trying to get my heart point to go right into the center bottom point on the square. And I'm happy with that, so I'll hit finished. Sew quilt, select the pattern, sew quilt, and it's going to go to the start position. And I'll let you watch this one sew out. I'm going to let you watch this one sew out. This is the hugs. This one's a full minute. I guess it has a little bit more lettering or more complicated lettering. I also mentioned that I was using a variegated thread on the bottom in the bobbin, and on this gold, because it's a little bit lighter, I'm seeing some of that shadowing through. I'm doing the last of the 4 designs. This one is going to be Mine. I've already outlined the block for the program, and you can see it came in. This one's almost level. I'm going to hit rotation and just level that out, and then I'm going to hit scale and reduce it just a little bit, and then I'm going to hit move and center my point on the bottom. There's also a crosshair in the middle of the design and the middle of the square. So I could be putting it there, but to me that looks too high. So I'm going to go ahead and put it right where I had it. This one's ready to stitch out, so I can hit finished. Select the design to sew, and it will move right to my start point for the first stitch to bring up the bobbin thread. Okay, I'm getting all my cameras in a row. I have finished all of the motifs that are floating in the 4 patches. Now I'm going to use a pantograph that's also a part of this set. I'm going to program this with the tablet and the head of the machine all the way forward, even though I need to do it in the back left hand corner where it's the start position. But it's easier for the camera to see it here. So I'm going to go ahead and program it now, and then I'll reprogram it after I turn the camera off. The process is the same as always. We're going to design sew. I'm going to be adding a pantograph that's part of this set. So start new. It's a pantograph, and I'm going to enter the rectangle manually. The width is 62 and the height is 24. That's the whole width and height of the whole table runner. So I can hit continue, and you can see the representation there. Hit finished. I'm going to go over, and this is the pantograph. It is basically a combination of all 4 of the conversation hearts, and you can see I added in the height of this design, which is 12.75 inches, so 12 3/4. So I'm going to select that, select it again, because we always have to do even and odd rows, and you can see there's a gap in the middle, which I'm not really crazy about. So I'm going to hit gap and just run my finger over it until the design nests together a little bit better, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit row height. Now it's the pattern height that we're actually trying to get to, but it's the row height that we're able to adjust. It's a funny little thing about the IQ. So I'm going to decrease. Right now the pattern height is at 14.117 inches, and I want to get it down to 12 3/4. So I'm going to keep reducing the row height until the pattern height is also adjusted. The closest I can get here is 12.707, which is almost 12.75. So I'm going to leave it there. And the transition type is what happens when the IQ sews off of the quilt. And continuous just means it just sews in a straight line down until it gets back to where it has to come back onto the quilt to finish the design. So we're accepting that. And then you can see my pantograph is ready to go. If we hit sew quilt, it would tell us the very first thing is the very top row, and we could continue. But I'm going to go ahead and reprogram this in the back corner the way I'm supposed to. And then we're also going to put in some no-sew zones because we don't want to sew over top of the squares that we've already done. You've seen me add no-sew zones before. I created a no-sew zone for these triangles. So I'm going to go ahead and press the start button. I've swapped my endpoints. I've already done the very top row, which was like barely even worth showing you. It is at this point that you can start to see how accurate or off I was at making my lines for my no-sew zone. And also I chose a variegated bright yellow for the stitching in this area because it's quite dark, this border and the background print. So I wanted the design to show up the best that it could. We should be able to see on this wedge here how accurate our lines were for our no-sew zone. I'm using a bright variegated yellow so that the design will show up on the background of this dark maroon and on all of this dark black and dark greens and red. When we get to this seam line, we should have a transition like here where it doesn't sew into the block but continues to sew the pantograph everywhere else. When I get past the halfway point, I'm going to have to do another no-sew zone for the bottom half of these squares. Some of this is almost stitching in the ditch. Okay, on the last row of the panto, it's the very last edge. I did a no-sew zone for the top half of the quilt, and for the transition type I hit continuous. I did a no-sew zone so it would only sew these diamonds at the bottom, and I did jump stitches, but I didn't adjust the threshold. The threshold is how far apart the jumps are before you'll want it to cut. If I'd made that like a couple inches, I could have eliminated half of the stops and starts. So I had about 30 stop and starts, so I didn't even film it. Now we're just going across the bottom. It's a complete pass. It's just going to give us a couple inches of the design, and then I'm going to go ahead and pull that off and show you where my mistakes were and how the table runner came out. Much like Schrodinger's cat, it's either it is or it isn't a holiday here. I'm filming this during Valentine's Day, and but sometimes I'm filming Thanksgiving during Christmas and Christmas during the 4th of July. So you never know when I'm going to be filming something, and also I never know when you're going to be viewing it, so it's perpetually a holiday here. We used the Jessica Schick's conversational heart pattern for the motifs. There are 4 of these hearts: love, cute, be mine, and hugs. We also used the Pantograph in the same collection called Conversational Hearts. That was a 12 3/4 inch design. I changed thread color for each of the different motifs, and you can see I used a variegated thread on the back. Again, we used a very old high fashion fabric with conversational heart print on it. And just to show you how old that is, I have another quilt that I made out of that years and years ago. This is at least 17 years old with the same conversational hearts. And you'll be seeing this again. This is the Lazy Afternoon. We do have the pattern for this on the website. It's free. I'm going to be teaching you how to make this quilt, and then we'll be working on quilting it. But we have this table runner finished. That's 2 table runners this week with the Valentine's theme, because I couldn't decide. I loved them both. And just like I love you both, love you all. Hope you love me. Thanks for joining me in the studio today. I look forward to seeing you again next time.